Good Saturday morning to you, and welcome to On the Mark alongside Mark Papa. I'm Gary Byron. Mark owns Financial Resources Group. They're out of Glastonbury, Connecticut. You can find them online as well at www.frplan. That's F as in Frank, frplan.com. And you can call him, schedule a no-obligation consultation, 860-657-8380. Once again, 860-657-8380. You can call him now, though he's a little busy right now. I got him at the moment. You can call him in 30 minutes when the show is over. You can call him sometime later today or Monday. But you should sit down with it. It could be the best phone call you've ever made for yourself in your future. So make sure that you do so sometime within the next day or so. Mark, good morning. Great to see you.
Hey, good morning, Gary.
Happy May, man, huh? Boy.
Yeah, I know. Happy May, exactly. And then hopefully those people who listened to my last episodes didn't sell. Okay, sell in May and go away. So good to be back, though. Honestly,
what's new with you?
There's a lot. There's a lot new. Tax season's winding down, and what I'm doing is following up on opportunities for people who had unnecessary fees and unnecessary taxes. I saw some really big unnecessary capital gains and money that they're passive, meaning money they're not using, and that they got hit with, that their advisor just continually fails to address. And we're going to go back and we're going to reevaluate those accounts and review them and do the 21-point checklist, go through their home insurance, go through their accounts, go through their taxes. And I'm going to squeeze all that excess costs and all that fat dripping in. That fat that's dripping, we're going to squeeze it all out and put them in a better place with the 21-point checklist. So nice. I've got a lot of people to follow up on because these are people who we obviously don't manage their money versus with our clients, with people with, $1 million+ accounts aren't seeing barely any capital gains at all when we do it the right way, which is great. Now they're making money, but they're not getting taxed on money they're not using. So
someone's calling you already. Yeah, I love it. That's exactly. Great. Do you want to do your disclaimer right now? Just get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the opinions are expressed during this broadcast are solely those of Mark Papa in his individual capacity and do not represent the views or positions of Financial Resources Group, LLC, which is a registered investment advisor. All investments involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. Nothing discussed during this program constitutes an offer to buy or sell securities or an investment product. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and consult a qualified financial professional before making investment decisions.
All right, great. Let's start with the headline I know everyone is watching, the Strait of Hormuz, right? A name that most Americans know, but probably never thought they'd be hearing about so much. What is going on over there, and why does it even matter to someone who's just sitting at home in Connecticut?
Well, Gary, this is one of the most consequential geopolitical events I've seen in a long time. And I want to make sure listeners really understand what's at stake here. The Strait of Hormuz is very, very clearly a very narrow waterway. It's about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and between Iran and the Gulf of Oman. But before the crisis, roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil and 20% of global liquefied natural gas, which is short for LNG, pass through it every single month. We're talking about 15 million barrels of oil per day, and that waterway is the economic pipeline for Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and every major Gulf producer. So when it closes, the energy market feels it immediately.
And it has effectively been closed since, I think, February 28th. So walk us through what happened.
Well, basically on February 28th, the United States and Israel, they launched military strikes on Iran. They targeted, military and government infrastructure. So we know this story, okay? I think the big picture here is what Trump is trying to do with this blockade. And it's a classic blockade. We've seen blockades happen throughout history. He's trying to squeeze the Iranian economy. He's trying to create pressure on the Iranians to come to the table and negotiate. As you saw, Trump had to cancel the meeting in Pakistan and said, hey, just give us a call, right? And then obviously we saw that other insane event where, that's his third assassination. I'm sure that's been a very big topic on your week, it's been weekday shows. So that's what they're trying to do. And, article in the Wall Street Journal this week does detail the kind of strain and pressure that they're feeling, in Iran right now. Which is so important because the economy is essentially in a free fall.
Yeah, and now we've got a situation where both the U.S. and Iran are essentially running their own blockades against each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I think the Iranians are trying to dig in. They've spoken with the Russians. They're trying to get help from the Chinese. They're clearly a bad actor in the world. If we can get this solved, I think the world will be a much better place. I think the Iranian people, by the way, who we can't forget, 30 to 40,000 people they don't use rubber bullets over there. They use real bullets. And, they kill, they torture, they maim, they do horrible things. They have all these, dark rooms where they take people and they torture them and terrible stuff. And then again, they put you on trial and then they hang you, real nice people. So, when we just talk about the human rights aspect of this as well, it's a pretty substantial, So, I mean, but the main thing is, we need to get, it goes to show how much they actually care about their people, the people in control. They obviously don't. It's disgusting. And I really think that putting pressure on them economically and squeezing them financially will create pressure on them to come to the table and negotiate.
What will this mean for oil prices and really for inflation here at home?
Well, Iran's economy was already in serious trouble before the first shot was even fired, Gary. So inflation had already hit 49%. Okay, in late 2025. Think about that. That means your dollar buys less than 50%. Than it did the prior year. It's called the Iranian rial. Was trading about 42,000 to the dollar a few years ago, and it collapsed to over 1.3 rials per dollar. So poverty estimates range from 22 to 50% of the population, and 57% of Iranians were already experiencing some type of level of food insecurity. This was a condition of the country walking into the conflict.
So let's talk about Iran itself, because while the world is watching the Strait, there's actually a parallel story that's about what is happening to the Iranian economy. How bad is it over there?
Well, I mean, the war has made all of that worse. I mean, dramatically worse. The IMF now, basically the International Monetary Fund, it projects the Iranian economy will shrink by 6.1% in 2026, with inflation approaching 70%. Iranian economists are no longer even talking about annual inflation. They're measuring it month to month. So in the best scenario, it's at least 5% inflation per month for the rest of the year. So prices in Iran have literally risen 6% just since the start of the conflict. And then food inflation is running over 112% annually for basic items. And early estimates indicate that Iran has suffered roughly $270 billion in direct and indirect war damages. So it's a pretty serious, dire situation. So it's a waiting game, right? And you're going to stare them down and say we're not budging, you hope that the economy collapses and the leaders, which I don't call leaders, but the people in charge, come to the table and negotiate in good faith.
Are you saying that the war has just made all of this worse?
Oh, significantly worse. I mean, what we're really looking at is the potential risk of an economic collapse there, which is it's definitely in a free fall. And that's the key question. And the smart analysts are divided. But on one hand, Iran is losing roughly $500 million a day, $500 million a day, according to President Trump's own statements. And the government reportedly struggled to make payroll for the military and its security forces, which, we do that, unfortunately, on purpose here. Okay. And Iran has had to also tap its sovereign wealth reserves and just, to import basic goods like rice, sugar, and red meat. So non-oil trade, which was, their non-oil income collapsed over 50%. So these are other goods and services that they make in the country. And on the other hand, Iran has also survived 5 decades of sanctions. So they have workaround networks. They have barter agreements with China and Russia. And the IRGC has its own financial machinery. So I basically call them a mafia at the end of the day. That's what they are. So, and the question is whether the current level of pressure gets us over the line and they create the threshold, or, while the mullah is going to be living fine and the people starving. And we saw what happened in France and, during the revolution, eventually it has to come to an end.
Do you think their regime is actually at risk of collapse?
I think it's well on its way. I think that not a position I'd want to be in, at the end of the day. So it's so we'll see what happens. It's just a wait and see. I don't want to make predictions, and I don't have an account on the prediction markets on what's going to happen. I probably should have looked at it before I came on the show to see, what are the chances are the Strait of Hormuz
What about the talks to just resolve this? You keep one day it's on, and then they're in Islamabad, and then they reach no solution, and then what happens after that? And we're going to have ongoing talks, but then what? Trump told Vance not to go, and basically told Iran, "You have our number. Just call us when you're ready to negotiate."
You're going to put your people on an 18-hour flight to get snubbed or reneged on. It just doesn't make any sense. So, I agree with Trump's strategy. This is why even putting your people at risk and the security and the cost of flying all the way there if they're not going to be there to negotiate in good faith. So. I agree with what he did. And sometimes, you have to walk away from the car salesman several times before you get the deal you want with the manager, All right. The way it is.
Let's pivot to something that's been quietly bubbling in the background of financial markets. I'm talking about the private credit market. This is really a space that's exploded in recent years. So help us understand what we're all talking about here.
Well, Gary, again, I've talked a lot about private credit recently, and I had to bring this up again, and it was a topic that it really is fresh on my mind as to what's going to happen in the private credit market. So private credit are lenders. They're doing higher risk loans. They are going after companies that maybe normally a bank won't go to, so that they're going to the private credit markets to get their capital to grow. And there's a lot of good companies out there who've borrowed money and that are current on their investments, on their debt payments. And then there's been some bad actors. And when you raise this much money and you see such a huge swelling over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years in private credit funding, that means eventually you run out of good deals to fund, Gary. And that means when you have this capital, you're getting paid a fee. You're not getting paid a fee to put it in a money market. You're there to lend that money. And I have a feeling that what happened is there are certain funds that just completely lowered their credit quality. But the main reason I want to bring this up is also the other day we just saw that ChatGPT, which is the big, obviously ready to go public, but it's the big AI play. It's what really, I think, ChatGPT saved the market in 2024 because, we had a nice rally back. I really think 2023 actually should have said we should have been in a recession. We should have had a down market. But ChatGPT, NVIDIA, the big AI trade was really came fresh to mind at that point. And but they actually could potentially see some slowing revenue. And I think a lot of the ChatGPT AI trade in the data centers and a lot of private lenders are in on a lot of those deals. So a couple examples of that would be private credit. Again, they're working outside the banking system. So you look at companies like Blackstone, Ares, Blue Owl, Apollo. They lend to these mid-sized growth companies, but they're also spending, tons of, billions of dollars, and they're on the hook for billions of dollars for these data centers. So if you see a company like, start questioning the growth of the AI trade, company behind ChatGPT, they're like the linchpin in all this stuff.
So wait a minute, hold on a second here. If I heard you correctly, ChatGPT, which is the most recognized AI brand in the world, you say they're missing revenue targets? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. So not only that, there's some of the ChatGPT. They're one of the largest borrowers in the space are tech and AI companies. So they've been burning cash at extraordinary rates, betting that future revenue will justify today's spending. And with that assumption, it's now being questioned in a very public way. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, just reported this week that it missed its internal user growth and revenue targets. And they had set a goal of reaching 1 billion weekly active users by the end of 2025. They fell short. So they've also missed that multiple monthly revenue targets in 2026. So, that's kind of a concern, right? Especially since there's a ton of money being lent to build out these data centers. So when you see a slowing, you have to ask yourself, are we ahead of our skis?
All right, but what does this have to do with private credit?
Well, what has to do with private credit is many of these private credit companies and funds are lenders to the AI trade, lenders to the AI infrastructure build out. So they're the big financiers, and a lot of those deals are not on balance sheet, like for Facebook or Oracle. I think they did off balance sheet deals with these private creditors as their partners. So if this doesn't materialize and it goes bust, that can be very, very ugly. I don't think that's going to happen, but I definitely think we're going to see some volatility there.
Yeah, but if this private credit goes sour, I mean, who fills that void? Who lends to growth companies. No one, right?
Right. So what can happen is we can have like a winter in lending. They called it the crypto winter when crypto crashed, and you saw for a couple years basically before crypto bounced back. But yeah, there could be a drought in lending available to these small and mid-sized companies as a result of this. So that's kind of what the main concern is, and that's not good for our economy. And if the big banks won't lend and the private lenders won't lend, where are these companies going to get their capital? So now it gets even a little bit more dicey.
Wow.
Yeah, and not only that, Gary, but the numbers are pretty staggering when you look at the full picture. So OpenAI is projected to burn through. That means spend through about $14 billion in 2026. So if you look at their inference costs alone, meaning what it costs to run the models and answer questions and user questions, are expected to hit $14 billion this year as well. So they're carrying $600 billion in long-term infrastructure commitments with Oracle, CoreWeave, NVIDIA, and others. So you have to ask yourself, their valuation is just, they just closed a funding round of $852 billion. That's approaching $1 trillion, Gary. Think about how staggering that number is.
It's insane.
It's staggering, right? So the market is pricing them as though the profitability is inevitable, but the fundamentals aren't saying that right yet.
Folks, you are listening to On the Mark alongside Mark Papa. I'm Gary Byron. You can, of course, find him online at frplan.com and at 860-657-8380. 860-657-8380. And I'll give you more points of contact. I'll even give you his address more towards the end of the show. Mark, let's get to what I think is one of the two biggest stories for investors this year. The changing of the guard at the Federal Reserve. Warsh, I believe his name is. Give us the lay of the land, because that's happening. We're in May now, so that's happening soon.
Yeah, so, I think it's going to be a very interesting transition. Something as big as the Fed chair is kind of a big deal, right? And I've lived through, at least through, Volcker.
I remember. I just remember Greenspan. He held that for years.
Volcker, Greenspan, and then we had helicopter Ben Bernanke. And,
Ben Bernanke, that's right. Yeah.
And then we, most recently, Jerome Powell, and now Kevin Warsh. So it's a really interesting. It's a very, very important job, but I think that Warsh has much different objectives, and I don't think he's going to be the Trump puppet everyone says he is. But I definitely have some concerns, in the short run, because it is a major, major transition, Gary.
Yeah, I can imagine. So who is this Warsh guy? I mean, for people who aren't familiar, what's his background? Why is he chosen?
Well, he was formerly a Federal Reserve governor from 2006 to 2011. Now, those allergies are getting you, huh?
They are. Oh, my God. I got to drink some water here.
Yeah, 2006 to 2011. He has a Wall Street background. He's a former Morgan Stanley executive. He's considered a monetary policy hawk, meaning he's, anti-inflation, and someone, who takes inflation very seriously. So Trump picked him because he's expected to be more accommodative than Powell on rate cuts. But there's a nuance here. Warsh came before, the Senate and said clearly that President Trump never asked him to commit to cutting rates.
I heard him say that, yeah.
And that, that he would preserve Federal Reserve independence. And that's an important thing. And the market's noticed. And let's hope that, he maintains that moral compass and we don't let our politicians dictate. Because you see how the politicians run the government. We certainly would not want them running our Federal Reserve anytime soon.
Well, I guess the golden question, I was going to get to it eventually, so I'll do it right now. Does this mean the rates are going lower or not? And if so, how long do we have to wait?
Well, that's quite an interesting thing. We just had our investment committee meeting this week, and based on some of the knowledge we obtained from what Warsh's objectives might be, we don't think that rates have the ability to even go down. In fact, there's a couple governors that think that rates might need to go up from here. Oh. So we think rates are going to stay flat, stay steady for a while. And I think inflation is going to be sticky. It's going to be higher for longer, going back to the Iranian issue. So we're going to see higher for longer. So we didn't feel at this point that it made, and this is anybody listening, if you have long-term treasuries, and I would say anything more than a 10-year maturity on your treasury, you need to give me a call. Let me analyze your fixed income portfolio, your bond portfolio. Most of you don't even realize that you have 30-year treasuries. Most of you also don't realize that they're mixed into some of your mutual funds, your growth and income funds, that those same treasuries in 2022, 30-year treasuries lost over 30% of their value. And when they lose 30% of their value, and it's a 30-year treasury, let's say you're 5 years into that treasury, you have to wait 25 years just to break even and get your money back at maturity. So, a lot can happen over 25 years, but you need to have your bond portfolios, your total portfolio analyzed for the kind of risk that bonds can create, because you can lose a lot of money in bonds. Now, they're not the safety net that you think they are. They're not. If you want a 3 to 5 year bond, fine. You lose a little money, you're going to get your money back in 3 years. You get money back in 5. You can wait for that. But when you're retired and you're 75, do you even want to wait 5 years to get your money back?
Not.
I mean, you don't even want to buy green bananas at that point, right? So that, so at the end of the day, having a 30-year treasury in your portfolio is probably not the best idea, especially with what I think is going to happen. So we can talk about that as well.
I mean, you mentioned a balance sheet. What does the balance sheet have to do with like long-term rates?
Well, it's extremely inflated. So here's where it gets interesting. Is Warsh laid out what he called a QT for cuts framework. And he wants to simultaneously reduce the Fed balance sheet, which currently stands at about $6.7 trillion, while potentially cutting long-term or short-term interest rates. So this idea that shrinking the balance sheet is a form of tightening, it's a very interesting pickle to be in. But it's a form of tightening at the long end of the curve. So if you own long bonds and you're tightening, that means that those long bonds could get hurt. And you can also offset with some of the relief on the short term, on the short end. But the practical effect of this is even short-term rates come down a bit. Long-term rates, the ones that drive mortgage rates, corporate borrowing, and capital spending may stay elevated or rise even more. So if interest rates rise on your 30-year treasuries, guess what? Look out below. Okay, and a lot of those are already in the hole. And not only that, banks own these same bonds. Assets held to maturity, they don't want to show anybody what they really own. So if it's a held to maturity asset, if they sell those bonds, they have to take a loss on their on their balance sheet. So it's not a great situation right now. Shrinking the Fed balance sheet is going to be very difficult, I think.
So what does this mean to the average person?
Well, what it means is that you have to pay attention to what's going on. You need an advisor who's following this closely and reading this, not somebody who's on the golf course with their half zip in their company logo. That puts you in a bunch of, growth and income funds because that's what they learned in their Series 7. You need somebody who's on the ball, someone who's going to sit down with you, dig into that portfolio, break out the morning stars, look at your average maturity, look at your duration, look at your risk, look at the credit quality of the funds you own in your bond portfolios, and sit down with me. Because that's where we can help you dramatically de-risk and reduce volatility in that account. And if something like this were to happen or it goes wrong, I think that could be very devastating to many retirees who rely on fixed income or bonds for the safety of their portfolio. And I also know a lot of the people with the big firms out there own individual bonds as well. They own individual bonds, and they're usually a mixed bag of maturities. Bond ladders, I think, is a dinosaur's approach to income strategies. And if you're in a bond ladder, then you absolutely need to give me a call because those longer maturity bonds are at very, very, I think, severe risk of loss potentially. And I'm not here to scare anybody. It's just a reality of that we need to maybe protect against, right?
Is it bad for stocks?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if borrowing costs go up, even on the long end, or people are spending more money to buy a house and they have less money to pay their mortgage, that means that's less money to put in their 401k every month. That could maybe have an impact. I haven't really done the research on that, but I absolutely think it's a possibility.
All right, I've got just a couple of minutes remaining. I didn't want this show to go by. I just want to talk briefly about Apple. This week brought one of the most significant corporate announcements in recent history. Tim Cook, obviously, stepping down. So what happened, and what does it even mean?
Well, basically, we have a new CEO of probably one of the world's largest companies. And that's going to be an interesting, that was on April 21st. Apple announced that Tim Cook would step down and, effective September 1st, and he'll become executive chairman of the board. And then John Ternus, currently Apple's senior vice president of hardware. So he's a hardware guy, and that's an interesting choice because, everyone's waiting for Apple's AI strategy and what that might be. And I think Apple's being interestingly very smart here. They're taking a step back. They're kind of watching what's going to happen. Right. So it's a really interesting strategy, but he's a hardware guy, and Apple makes great products. So that's really where I think they want to maintain
but they
their
face
focus.
criticism for lagging behind in AI. Is that why Cook is leaving, you think?
No. Interesting enough, but then they went and appointed a hardware guy. He's not a software guy. AI is more software than hardware. I mean, you need hardware to run it, but it's a pretty interesting take. But he was approved unanimously by the board. This is only the third CEO transition in Apple's history. And it's defining the moment for one of the most valuable companies on earth. So, the legacy, if we put that into context, if you look at Jobs and Cook and now Ternus, I mean, there's some big, big shoes to fill for this gentleman, Ternus.
What do you think his first priorities will be?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, if you look at Steve Jobs, he was the original visionary, right? He built Apple from a garage startup. He was more of a startup CEO, but then he came back and he learned a lot of lessons when he got fired. And he came back with the iMac, the iPod, the iTunes, the iPhone.
Right,
he disrupted. I mean, think about it. Most people don't have regular cameras anymore. Most people don't have tape decks anymore, right? Most people don't have CDs anymore. So he revolutionized that industry. He reinvented Apple multiple times. And this is how we run our business, Gary. We reinvent ourselves all the time. So I'd love to come back and talk to you more about this transition because we're running out of time.
Well, I think
it's pretty important.
Talk about 10 seconds. Talk about this full checklist review that you offer free. It's a $250 value. That's great.
Yeah, and honest answer, Gary, if you really, really want an urgent moment to meet with me, it would have to do with this Fed transition, interest rates, and what can potentially happen to long-term debt if we have a steepening yield curve. That's absolutely huge, and it means you could lose a lot of money if you don't have your ducks in a row. And that's something that one of the 21 points in our 21-point checklist is fixed income and interest rate volatility. We will teach you more about bonds. You'll know more about bonds than 99% of the people walking on the street when we're done. And then, it's that, and it's the financial planning aspect, the estate planning coordination, your home and property insurance review. There was rates are spiking all over the country. You can't get insured in certain areas. So, that's what we're looking to do. We're here to really make sure you're covered on all bases.
That checklist is a $250 value. You can get
$2,500.
What did I say?
$2,500 value at no cost or obligation.
$2,500. Look at that. You can contact Mark very easily over at Financial Resources Group. They're in Glastonbury, Connecticut. You can find them online at frplan.com or by calling this number, 860-657-8380. Again, 860-657-8380. For Mark Papa, I'm Gary Byron. Thank you so much for listening to On the Mark. Until next Saturday morning, have a good one, everybody.